Good evening. My name is Margaret Door, and I'm a lawyer from Washington State, where assisted suicide is legal. In the fine print, our law, like your bill, also allows euthanasia. I am also president of Choices Illusion, a nonprofit corporation opposed to assisted suicide and euthanasia worldwide. You should have my materials that were handed up. This is a legal analysis of your bill. I also have these 3 handouts. One of them is a press release. Couple points. Most important is we're not talking about people who are dying anytime soon, okay? This is, as an example, this is my friend, Jeannette Hall, who was talked out of assisted suicide in Oregon 17 years ago. She was adamant she was going to use Oregon's law, and then after a doctor was just aghast, and after a few weeks, he was able to get her to be treated for cancer. And if she were here, she'd tell you to eat your strawberries, but that's another issue. So I know I don't have much time. And the bill, the easiest thing to see about the bill, it's supposed to give people choice. It's especially risky for people. I'm a guardianship appellate lawyer, guardianship, inheritance lawyer, and appeals. And I've seen the terrible things that people do to each other. And from my perspective, the most at-risk group would be people age 60 and above, people such as yourselves, the middle class and above, because as you all get older, you've got, you know, the heirs. I've seen terrible things, what people do to each other. And the easiest thing to see what's wrong with the bill, like in my practice, I've seen people voluntarily sign up, but then after that, the bill can, sorry, I'm going so fast. The administration of the lethal dose can take place in private without witnesses. 2 people can be there, 1 leaves alive, 1 leaves dead. What happened? It's the complete, creates the perfect crime. And then the way I read your bill, which is explained more in my memorandum, the death certificate will not reflect a natural death because it's not, as a matter of law, considered to be suicide, assisted suicide, mercy killing, or homicide.
Thank you. Any questions of this witness? Yes, Representative Roberts.
Thank you. In your opinion, will this increase the regular suicides that are going on?
I think, from my experience, it will. I've had a couple of people call me, well, 3 people call me wanting to use a Death with Dignity Act for regular suicide. The first guy was 27. They were all healthy. They were depressed. The next one was 50, and the other one was in his 30s. So they all called me wanting to know how to use the act.
Okay, so do you happen to know of a lot of people who've wanted to do this?
Those are the 3 people. I've had people in my practice whose parents used Washington's Act or Oregon's Act. In the first case, it was, well, they were both voluntary sign-ups. You know, people sign up just in case, at least in my experience, just in case things get bad. And then once he got it, his girlfriend really wanted to have a suicide party for him.
I'm sorry, what did you just say?
His girlfriend, the gentleman's girlfriend, wanted to have a suicide party for him.
Suicide party?
Yeah, like they have a party and at the end the guest of honor kills himself in front of everybody. That does happen. And then the other side of the family, his daughter and his ex-wife, they were really against him doing this, and he spent the last couple of months of his life torn over whether or not he would kill him, whether or not he should kill himself. He just vacillated back and forth. So he didn't like do those last things like say goodbye or that last trip to Mount Rainier or whatever somebody might do. The other one, the son called me and had been told by someone, the son had used to live in Oregon, his father lived in Oregon, and told me that he had been told by a friend that he knew down there who had been at his dad's suicide party that there were actually 2 suicide parties. The first night, Dad said, no, he had been at voluntary sign-up. The dad said, no, you're not killing me, I'm going to bed. And then everybody left, and then this person told my client that the next day they got a call, and then he was ready to do it now, and they wanted, the wife called and said, well, you know, he's ready to do it now, and they got there, and he was already high on alcohol. and so he took the lethal dose, which doesn't sound too voluntary to me. And then the gentleman that I'm talking about, who was my client, but we also had a lawyer in Oregon, and he got a cop involved, and then everybody changed their story. And my client didn't want to pursue it.
Wow, I could see where that would be problematic. And so, do you think with people who are leaving money or where there's inheritance involved, this bill could cause a problem there because of that?
Well,
So-
yeah, because people can sign up just in case. Well, actually, with the one with the 2 suicide parties, I did notice, I used to do divorce work, I did notice that the wife was like 20 years younger. I mean, if she divorced him, he would have got the house, he would have got something, and this way she got everything.
Wow.
The other thing that was interesting about that case was that in the police report, the cop noted that he went to see the doctor because we saw the person that signed the death certificate, and that doctor was not aware that it was a assisted suicide case, wasn't aware it was a Death with Dignity Act, and there was nothing in the file indicating that it was a Death with Dignity Act, which is supposedly one of the protections. So anyway, just
Okay.
an aside.
All right, I just have a couple more quick questions. Is diabetes, for the purpose of this act, considered terminal illness? I mean, a
I
terminal
would say,
illness that they
yes,
could...
I addressed this in the memorandum. Insulin-dependent diabetes, where someone is dependent on insulin to live, would fit the definition of your act, and I put in an affidavit of Dr. William Toffler from Oregon to back me up, because the definition of whether or not you're terminal is 6 months or less than 6 months to live. That's determined in practice in Oregon without treatment. So a 20-year-old insulin-dependent diabetic will live less than a month without insulin. So that person would therefore be terminal for the purpose of the bill that is now before you, the way I read it. And if, you know, you can read it yourself to see if you agree with me or not. I think I'm right, and I've got the affidavit of Dr. William Toffler backing me up.
Okay, and you have heard of people who had like a dire prognosis, maybe like 2 weeks, maybe, and then it turned around and they lived?
Yeah, and also medical mistakes, like just straight up mistakes, like test results get switched. You know, that kind of thing happens.
Yeah, I know I've heard of that happening.
Yeah,
I've heard
and
many stories about that
Yeah,
happening.
and I have an example actually in my materials of a gentleman who I met who had been diagnosed with, well, he had ALS, and he was given 3 to 5 years to live, and then he was going to die of paralysis. He actually was suicidal. They committed him. Anyway, when I met him, he picked me up at the airport, and he was 74 years old. It had just stopped, and he worked as a bus driver for 50 years, because you don't have to actually grip the wheel if you think about it. You can just drive. So, and he did other things and
Okay, and just
happy.
just one last question. As far as is there an annual report that you've noticed with this? Because there doesn't seem to be any oversight.
I didn't see it in your bill.
You didn't see anything?
Oregon
Okay.
has an annual report, although I will note that if you examine Oregon's website, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it with me today, but they actually say right in it, or they used to say it the last time I copied stuff off, that they don't even write the patient names down. The so-called oversight agency of the state doesn't even write the patient names down, and even law enforcement cannot get access to information about the deaths in Oregon.
Wow. Okay.
So there, you know, the idea that this is somehow protected, but the easiest thing to see is the complete lack of oversight of the death. 2 people can be there, one leaves alive, one leaves dead. One inherits from the one that leaves alive, that leaves dead. What happened?
Any other questions for the witness?
Okay,
Rep.
thank you.
Wrangler Bassa?
Margaret, I have a question for you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your lit, you mentioned that if this bill becomes law, there's a path to elder abuse. Do you have any hard data that supports, not in Rhode Island, obviously, but where you're from, the number of elderly abuse that can be quantified
Okay,
based on
so
on
first
this?
of all, elder abuse in general is very lowly reported. I think there's studies that say only 1 of 14 people who are being abused report, or 1 of 24. And the reason is they don't want to, you know, like a mom doesn't want to let people know that little Johnny, who she's appraised all these years, so it's not reported generally. It's underreported, and it's happening a lot. And as for statistics or anything about it happening with the Death with Dignity Acts, it's very hard to get that information, although we do have anecdotal information. Like with the gentleman with the 2 suicide parties. I mean, where was I going to complain?
Right.
I mean, we sent a cop to try and get information from the state just to confirm whether or not the gentleman had died under Oregon's law. And the state would not tell him, would neither confirm nor deny whether the gentleman had used the law.
I brought that up because you referenced it, but also my second...
Because of what?
You referenced it in your
yeah.
lit.
Yeah.
And then my other question is, for the parties that you reference, talk about the frequency of those parties,
I
the
can just,
suicide parties that you referenced.
I can't tell you, I know they happen because I've read about them in the papers. In the 2 cases I had, the one gentleman did have a suicide, well, he had 2 suicide parties. And the other one, the advocacy group that was encouraging this wanted the gentleman to have a suicide party.
Okay, well, I asked the question because...
But there's not statistics. I mean, Compassion Choices, I suppose. The former
Yeah.
Hemlock Society would know better than we did. And actually, that's where we ended up getting, well, never mind. But
Well,
yeah.
I asked the question
Because the state is the oversight, but the
Right.
state can't give you anything. Okay, what?
I asked the question because you inferred that there might have been a lot of these parties, and so I wanted to know if you had numbers to back up what your testimony.
You could do a word search on suicide party, and you'll come up with them. So there was Lavelle Svart in Oregon. That was a very well publicized suicide party. It was actually filmed, and they had it online for a long time of her lying there dying. I think there's still pictures of her online dying, but they're not labeled with her name.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rep. Perez.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify what we heard before, I like your paper saying here, New Mexico Supreme Court overturned assisting suicide. I say that because my college over there asked before to the sponsor, and she said that she don't no stay, never overturn it. Also say the Alabama passed banning a system, and Utah passed a bill clarify assisting suicide as a crime. Then there is state they overturn it.
Is there a question? Or?
No, just to clarify.
Yeah, there's been some pushback in other states, and I do have like backup documentation in my materials. So Utah just passed a law making it a crime to assist a suicide in Utah. I'm giving a brain fart. New Mexico did overturn assisted suicide, and I gave you guys a page from the legal opinion doing it, just one page, because it's too fat to put the whole thing in. And then, oh yeah, Alabama, they call it the Alabama, they called it a ban act, so that's why I used the word ban.
Thank you.
And, yeah.
Any other questions?
One
Thank-
question?
Yes.
Just wanted to go back to the attorney for just a quick second. I had a former representative from New Hampshire who had emailed me prior to tonight's testimony. I was looking through it again. She mentioned that Oregon had, the Senate and the House had both passed a bill, and I have it in front of me here. It would basically allow healthcare representatives to remove access to food and water for vulnerable Oregonians with dementia and Alzheimer's. It's on its way to the governor's desk. So we talk about a slippery slope. We're helping people who decide that they perhaps want to, end their life, but now they've gone a step further. People that are not perhaps in their right mind, denying them access to food and water, essentially starving or dehydrating them to death. Are you familiar with that bill at all?
Yes, I have two comments. First of all, under the ground, they've been doing that for a while in Oregon, according to doctors I know, starving people to death. It's not a very nice way to die. Second of all, in Oregon, there was already, Oregon has a 6 months to live on the bill like the one that's before you today. And there was a proposal to expand that to 6 months to live, to 1 year. And then in New Hampshire, a few years ago, they had a bill that was broad enough to include, the way it was defined, to include someone in a wheelchair who wasn't sick. So there is a push, we're seeing a push to expand. If you look at the bills, it's in the fine print, just like that your bill legalizes euthanasia, it's in the fine print.
Well, and again, just we always talk about the slippery slope. And
Yes.
to see something like this where the person is not making the decision, but that in fact the decision is being made for them
All right.
is a little frightening.
Right, but under the bill you're considering, the person doesn't really have to make the decision. What if they don't? So what? The death certificate's going to reflect a natural death. Because of the language, it says that it's not suicide, assisted suicide, or euthanasia. And you self-administer too, doesn't have to be voluntary.
Rep. Perez, you have a question for Mr. Bracey?
Question, when you hear something like this, make you remember Nazi Germany, right? The state killed people just because they were not smart, they were sick, and that's what we're talking here, killing people just because they're sick. I believe that God gives life, and God is the only one who can take
Rep. Perez, we asked the questions instead of...
The question
yeah.
is, this talking just make you think about Nazi Germany. They did that to the people.
Thank you.